Chapter 1. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Robert Kiyosaki begins the book by telling us that, unlike most people, he grew up with two fathers. One was his real father, the man who raised him. Robert calls him Poor Dad. The other was the father of his best friend, Mike. Robert calls him Rich Dad. Both men were intelligent. Both worked hard. Both had careers and earned money. Both believed strongly in education. But they had completely different ideas about money and success. Robert says one eventually became financially wealthy, while the other struggled financially throughout his life. Robert's poor dad believed in the traditional path. He believed that a person should study hard, get good grades, obtain a good education, and then find a secure job. To him, education was the foundation of success. A good job meant security, a regular income, and a respectable life. Rich Dad also believed in education, but he believed there was another kind of education that was just as important: financial education. He wanted Robert to understand money. He wanted him to know how money is made, how it is managed, how businesses work, how investments work, and, most importantly, how a person can eventually make money work for them. As Robert grew up, he began listening to both men, and this created a conflict in his mind. One father was telling him, "Get a good education, get a good job, work hard, save money, avoid financial risks." The other father was teaching him to think differently. Learn about money. Don't depend completely on a salary. Learn how to build wealth. Learn how to make money work for you. Robert realized that both fathers loved him and wanted him to succeed. The difference was what they believed success actually meant. His poor dad believed that security came from having a good job. Rich Dad believed that financial freedom came from understanding money. This difference became the foundation of Robert's financial education. As a young boy, Robert became fascinated with the idea of becoming rich. He and his friend Mike wanted to know how wealthy people became wealthy, but they didn't know where to start. So they decided to ask Mike's father, the man Robert would eventually call Rich Dad, to teach them. And this is where Robert's unusual financial education really begins. Instead of simply sitting them down and giving them a lecture about investing, Rich Dad decided to teach them through experience. He wanted the boys to discover something for themselves. He wanted them to understand why so many people spend their entire lives working for money without ever becoming financially free. Chapter 2. The rich don't work for money. Robert and Mike had already decided that they wanted to become rich. So they went to Mike's father and asked him to teach them how to become wealthy. Rich Dad agreed, but instead of giving them a business idea or telling them where to invest, he gave them a job. He arranged for the boys to work in one of his stores for a very small amount of money. At first, Robert was excited. He thought this was the beginning of his journey to becoming rich. But after working for a while, he became frustrated. He was spending his time working, yet he wasn't earning much money. Eventually, Robert began to feel that he was being treated unfairly. But this was exactly what Rich Dad wanted. Rich Dad was trying to teach him an important lesson. Most people work because they need money, and their need for money controls them. When people need money, they become afraid of losing their jobs. When they earn more, they often want more things. When they want more things, they need more money. This creates a cycle. Robert calls this cycle the rat race. Rich Dad wanted Robert to understand that the problem wasn't simply having a job. The problem was allowing fear and desire for money to control every financial decision. He wanted Robert to learn how to think beyond his paycheck. Eventually, Rich Dad offered Robert a different opportunity to make money. But the real lesson was not about the amount he could earn. It was about learning to recognize opportunities and understanding that money itself isn't the ultimate goal. Robert began to realize that if he spent his entire life working only for a salary, he could remain trapped in the same cycle forever. Rich Dad's lesson was simple but powerful. Don't allow the need for money to control your life. Learn how money works instead. And that becomes one of the central ideas of the entire book. Chapter 3: Why Teach Financial Literacy? After teaching Robert that simply working for money could keep a person trapped, Rich Dad moved on to another important lesson. He wanted Robert to understand why some people become rich while others remain financially struggling, even when they earn good incomes. His answer was financial education. Robert explains that when people receive money, they often immediately think about what they can buy with it. But Rich Dad taught him to look at money differently. He taught Robert to look at financial statements. A financial statement shows what comes into your life financially and what goes out. Robert learned to pay attention to income, expenses, assets, and liabilities. This became one of the most important lessons he received. Rich Dad explained that poor and middle-class people often focus heavily on their income. They want higher salaries because they believe a bigger paycheck will solve their financial problems. But if their expenses rise at the same time, they may still struggle. For example, someone gets a raise and immediately buys a more expensive car. Then perhaps they move into a bigger house, take on more payments, and increase their lifestyle. Their income increased, but so did their expenses. So they still need the next raise. This is why Rich Dad wanted Robert to understand the difference between being able to earn money and being able to manage money. Then came the famous lesson about assets and liabilities. Rich Dad taught Robert to focus on buying assets, things that can put money into his pocket, and to be careful about accumulating liabilities that continually take money out. Robert uses this idea to challenge the way people normally think about wealth. A person can own an expensive house, drive an expensive car, and wear expensive clothes, yet still have very little financial freedom. Someone else might live modestly while steadily acquiring income-producing assets. The second person may actually be moving closer to financial independence. Robert, therefore, argues that financial intelligence is not about how much money you make. It's about what you do with the money you make. Rich Dad wanted Robert to become financially educated enough to look at an investment, a business, or a purchase and understand what it would do to his financial position. The lesson was becoming clear. If you don't understand money, earning more money alone may not make you wealthy. And this leads Robert to another important question. If you have a job and earn money, what exactly are you building for yourself? Chapter 4: Mind Your Own Business. Robert explains that having a profession is not necessarily the same thing as having your own business. You may work as an employee and have a successful career, but your salary still depends on the organization paying you. Rich Dad wanted Robert to build something beyond his paycheck. He told him to mind his own business, meaning he should pay attention to building his own asset column. Robert doesn't mean that everyone must immediately quit their job and start a company. Instead, his message is that while you work for an income, you should also gradually build assets that belong to you. The difference is important. Your job pays you for the work you perform. Your assets can potentially generate income without requiring you to exchange every hour of your life for money. Robert therefore encourages readers to look at their personal finances differently. Instead of spending every increase in income on a better lifestyle, use some of that money to acquire assets. Over time, the asset column can grow. And as it grows, your dependence on your salary can potentially decrease. This is the direction Rich Dad wanted Robert to take. Don't simply build a career. Build your financial foundation. And from here, Robert moves into another subject that strongly affects how people build and keep wealth: taxes and corporations. Chapter 5: The History of Taxes and the Power of Corporations. Robert explains that throughout history, governments have created systems for collecting taxes. He then compares how ordinary employees and wealthy business owners can experience the tax system differently. His argument is that financially educated people learn the rules of the system. They don't simply ask, "How much money am I making?" They also ask, "How much of it am I keeping?" Robert discusses corporations and explains how businesses can have expenses and financial structures that individuals may not have in the same way. His larger lesson is not simply start a corporation. It is learn the financial rules. If you don't understand taxes, businesses, investments, and financial statements, you may make decisions without understanding their consequences. But if you become financially educated, you can make more informed choices. This is why Robert repeatedly comes back to education, not just academic education, financial education. And now the book moves to one of its most interesting ideas. Chapter 6: The Rich Invent Money. Robert argues that opportunities are not always obvious. Two people can look at exactly the same situation and see completely different things. One person sees a problem, another sees an opportunity. Why? According to Robert, financial intelligence. He believes financially educated people can recognize possibilities because they understand numbers, markets, investments, and business. They know how to ask different questions. Instead of simply asking, "Can I afford this?" they might ask, "How could this opportunity produce money?" Robert also emphasizes creativity. Sometimes people believe the only way to become wealthy is to earn a bigger salary. But he argues that wealth can also come from finding creative ways to solve problems, create businesses, acquire assets, and take advantage of opportunities. However, Robert also makes clear that financial intelligence doesn't mean being reckless. You need knowledge, you need experience, and you need to learn from mistakes. The more financially educated you become, the better you may become at recognizing opportunities that others overlook. And that brings Robert to another major lesson. Chapter 7: Work to Learn. Don't work for money. Robert explains that people often choose jobs based almost entirely on salary. If one job pays more, they automatically assume it is better. But Robert argues that sometimes the most valuable thing a job can give you is a skill. He encourages people to become well-rounded, learn how to communicate, learn sales, learn leadership, learn accounting, learn management, learn how to negotiate, learn how businesses operate. Why? Why? Because of fear. People are afraid of losing money. They're afraid of making mistakes. They're afraid of looking foolish. They're afraid of failing. Robert argues that successful people are not necessarily people who never experience fear. They're people who learn how to deal with it. He also discusses cynicism, the negative voices that tell people why something won't work. Then there is laziness. Sometimes people say they don't have time to learn about money, while spending hours on things that don't improve their financial lives. Robert also talks about bad habits. He argues that what you do with money consistently matters more than occasional bursts of financial discipline. Finally, he discusses arrogance. If you believe you already know everything, you stop learning. For Robert, overcoming these obstacles is part of becoming financially intelligent. And once you've overcome them, the next question is, how do you actually begin? Chapter 9. Getting Started. Robert now turns his attention to people who want to begin building wealth. He encourages readers to develop a strong reason for wanting financial freedom. You need something powerful enough to keep you moving when things become difficult. He also encourages people to learn continuously. Find people who know what you don't know. Learn from successful people. Study investments. Look for opportunities. Build skills. And take action. Robert's message is that you don't need to know everything before you begin learning. You learn by doing, studying, making mistakes, and correcting them. The important thing is to begin, developing the mindset and habits necessary for financial independence. Chapter 10. Still want more? Here are some to-dos. Robert gives readers additional ideas for continuing their financial education. The message is essentially, don't stop learning. Keep looking for opportunities. Keep developing your financial intelligence. Find ways to turn your knowledge into action. Look at your own financial situation honestly. Ask yourself what you are currently doing with your income. Ask whether you are building assets or simply increasing your expenses. And keep working toward the point where your money and assets can provide you with more freedom. The final lesson. By the end of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert has taken us back to the fundamental difference between his two fathers. Both men wanted him to succeed. Both believed in hard work. Both valued education. But they taught him to pursue very different things. Poor Dad emphasized education, employment, and financial security. Rich Dad emphasized financial intelligence, assets, business, and financial independence. Robert's greatest lesson was that wealth is not simply about how much money you earn. It's about understanding money. It's about what you do with it. It's about what you build with it. And it's about whether you are gradually moving toward financial freedom or remaining trapped in the cycle of working simply to pay your bills.